All right, welcome back, everybody. We are back with another Tank Talk. We are here once again with our wonderful friend, Dr. Nick, who is an established aquatic veterinarian of many years. Welcome, Dr. Nick.
Thank you. Good to be here again.
Awesome. So this week we are back to talk about koi, and I think particularly koi in the spring. So definitely kind of a new segment. I think we've touched on a little bit in the past. As obviously koi and fish in general, there's a lot of similarities, but I'm excited to see something specifically about koi. So without further ado, I'll let you take the reins from there, Dr. Nick.
Thank you, Ian. So, being springtime coming on here now, koi ponds are very popular. They're very big. It becomes really important in the springtime to get your fish out of the winter hibernation and get them active and eating, get the tank cleaned out, warmed up. And so I was thinking about that and I thought, well, let's just do a talk specifically about koi. So we'll cover all those things and even more. So, what exactly are koi? They're a big, colorful fish. Most people know that they're associated with Japan, and uh, what exactly are they? Are there? Well, I've been keeping koi myself for, gosh, many, many years. Since I was a kid, I had them in an aquarium, and then now in a koi pond, and we've always thought originally the koi were a color variety of common carp, but actually recent DNA analysis, so genetic studies, have shown that they're not the common carp, but the Amur carp. And so that's a little bit different thinking. And for those of you who are familiar with the common carp, they're usually actually taller and not as long fish, whereas the Amur carp is a much longer, skinnier fish, which more fits the body shape of koi. So that actually makes more sense. And I'll talk a little bit more about the genetics of that as we go. But so koi were believed to be color varieties of the common carp, but are actually more likely to be the Amur carp. And that what we call the Japanese colored carp or koi comes from the word Nishikigoi, which is Japanese for brocaded carp. And it's a domesticated color variety of the Amur carp. So, boy, this text is a little bit small, but what we see is the kingdom is our animals. So I'm just going to go through the phylogenetic makeup of what koi are. So, kingdom, phylum, the chordata, which are fish that have chordates, are animals that have chordates and then backbones, be the vertebrata, subphylum, superclass, Gnathostomata, meaning they have a mouth. So there are some fish that have mouths and some fish that don't have mouths, like lampreys. And lampreys, so it's split into lampreys and other bony fish that do have a complete mouth. So osteichthyes is the grade, meaning bony fish. They have a complete set of bones, unlike sharks and rays, which are cartilaginous fish that don't have solid calcium bones, but just have cartilage for their bony structure. Then actinopterygii, which means they have fins, complete fins. Subclass Neopterygii. Superclass is okay. The have a osteophysi, which means that they have bones attached to the air bladder, and we know carp and minnows and koi, they all have gas bladders. Cypriniformes means they're carp-shaped. On the order, suborder Cyprinidae. Family is Cyprinidae, genus Cyprinus, which probably comes from an old Greek word for copper because of their copper coloration. And then originally it was Cyprinus carpio, and we thought they were common carp, but now we call them Cyprinus rubofuscatus, which is the Amur carp. And the Amur carp at one time were believed to be a subspecies of common carp, but now they're known to be a separate species, and that the koi are descendant from the Amur carp rather than the common carp. So going back to the history of Amur carp, they've been aquacultured as a food fish in China since 2000 BC. So that's 4,000 years they've been raised as food in China. There's actually a book written in China in 500 BC on the culture of carp. So it's one of our, not only an old book, but it's an old book specifically about how to raise carp. And they were brought from China to Japan probably about the 1500 AD, and they were raised by the rice farmers in their ponds that they raised their rice in. They would put the fish in. And I'm going to just kind of read you. This is a little section from my book, Advanced Koi Care. And this is kind of an interesting bit, so I thought I'd just read it to you. It says, the rice farmers of Niigata Prefecture on the northwestern coast of Japan started raising carp in their irrigation reservoirs above their rice paddies. The fish would spawn in the spring, and by fall, the babies would be about 4 inches long. These would be dried and salted and eaten during the winter months. The parent stock would be brought indoors and kept in water-filled depressions dug in the dirt floors of the house until the following spring. Family members would take turns stirring the water to provide oxygen to keep the fish alive through the winter. So this is really it's a food fish, and they're raised for food. Every year they would get to a certain size, they'd dry them out, they'd eat them, they'd sell them, and that was a crop in addition to the rice they'd produce. And so the systemic breeding of ornamental and mercarp began in the 1820s in the Niigata Prefecture in Japan. So what does that mean? That means that at some point after hundreds of years of raising these, they started realizing that there's some color varieties that are not just the common golden, greenish, gray carp color, but red color. And red was the first color that they noticed. So I'm going to read you just one more section. Colored carp, then called irigoi, which is just like a fancy color carp, were mostly unknown outside of the Niigata prefecture until the mayor of Higashimoya sent 27 koi to the 1914 Tokyo Taisho exhibition as a unique product of his prefecture. So this was like a state fair type thing where everybody's bringing in their crops. So they're bringing in their rice. And in 1914, they decided to bring some koi, which were something that they were growing in Japan in their farm ponds, but they had developed these fancier colors just out of fun, just for something to do. And once they were brought to this Tokyo agricultural show, these fish were awarded the second prize at the exhibition, and 8 of them were presented to Emperor Yoshihido's son, Hirohito. These were placed in the moat around the emperor's palace. So that was the beginning of keeping koi as an ornamental fish. And so we see here back, in the 1820s, they started getting fancy colors. Selective breeding gave rise first to a red carp, which is called higoi, meaning red carp, as early as 1803, then to the pale blue asagi, the white, red, and yellow bekoi, the sarasa, which is a red and a white pattern, and that was created around 1830. And we know this because the breeders started keeping written records, and they started drawing pictures of their fish in their little notebooks, and they started trading fish among these different breeders. So suddenly what was originally a food fish became a pet fish, and they were keeping these in their ponds and breeding them for fun. And then here we have it, 200 years later after the origin, these things are all over the world. And so the yellow color variety, the Kiyotsuura came later. And then from all of these original color varieties, they bred different ones together. They kept records of which ones they bred. So they were studying genetics. They would breed, a red and white one with a blue one and see what colors came out and then keep track of that. And so the Japanese koi farmers for several hundred years now have been working on this and keeping really good records on how to produce very colorful koi. The Ogon is a fairly recent one, which is a solid color, shiny metallic koi. And then the Shisui were developed in 1909, so still over 100 years ago, by crossing the colored Nishikigoi with German scaleless mirror carp, which is a variety of Cyprinus carpio, the common carp that was bred for food in Germany. So they had this common carp and they bred it to not have scales. And so that made it real easy to eat. You know, you're got a big fish, you're going to eat it, and you don't have to clean scales off of it. This was really, really popular. So it was called the mirror carp or the scaleless carp. So when they brought some of those to Japan in the early 1900s, they crossbred them with some of their colored koi, and they ended up with a scaleless koi, which they called doitsu. And doitsu is the Japanese word for Deutsch, which is the German word for German. So the Doitsu koi are basically German koi that were bred by breeding the colored carp with the scaleless carp to come up with scaleless koi. So that's a little interesting fact. So now we have what's called Nishikigoi, which is Japanese for brocaded carp. And brocade is a very fancy silk embroidered fabric, very, very colorful. And so when they saw these fancy carp, they thought these are as pretty as brocade. So these brocaded carp, Nishikigoi, which then we shortened to koi. Goi means carp, so we don't call them goi because that could be any carp. So we call them koi, which are the brocaded carp. So this is a great picture. I just want you to show that here's a koi that someone had put into a pond, and when they're in a large water environment, they get very, very big. So koi are not really appropriate for keeping in aquariums. You have to have hundreds of gallons aquarium if you want to keep them in an aquarium. They really need a lot of water. And as they get bigger, an average koi will get between 2 and 3 feet long. Some of them reach over 3 feet. This one is probably over 3 feet. And we know it's a koi because if you look at the nose, there is a barbel. It has whiskers. Koi all have whiskers. Goldfish don't have whiskers. So it kind of looks like a goldfish. This is actually called an orangigoi, which is the Japanese word for orange. Orangigoi, which means orange koi. And so here's this, some fishermen, you find these. I've seen a lot of pictures on the internet of fishermen catching big koi that people have been put into ponds. So don't put koi in ponds because they're not native. They really should only be kept in your home pond, not in lakes. Okay, so I want to cover just briefly some of these color varieties of koi. So the big one people talk about is the kohaku, which is a white fish with a red pattern on the back. So that's the staple kohaku. Then if you have a white fish with a red pattern and a little bit of black on it, it's called a sankei, and that's one of the other big popular varieties. And then a white fish with lots of black and red is called a Showa sanshoku. So these two are very similar, and you have to look at the amount of black. If the black is just kind of spots around it, it's a sankei. But if the black is a major color and it extends onto the base of the fins, it's a Showa. And then you have a fish that has a red spot only on the head is called a tancho, named after the tancho crane, which just has a big red spot on its head. And this is a symbol of Japan because the Japanese flag has a red circle on a white flag. So when you have this tancho kohaku, which is a white fish with a red circle on its head, that's a very popular fish, especially in Japan, because it symbolizes the Japanese flag, just like a red, white, and blue fish might represent the American flag. And then you have other color varieties such as the shirobeko, which is like a sankei, that it's a white fish that just has some black spots on it, no red, but just the smaller black spots. But then a shiro utsuri is like the showa. It's a white fish that has big black spots, no red though. So the black and white fish with a few black spots is a shirobeko. Black and white fish with lots of black spots, big black spots, is shiro utsuri. And those are really the basic colors. There actually are 13 color varieties, and there's also scale patterns. And when you see ginrin, that means a gold scale, and this is a ginrin sankei. So it still is a sankei. It's a white fish with black and red, but the scales have a metallic sheen to them, so they have this sparkly to them, and that's called the ginrin. And you can get ginrin, which is a scale pattern, in any of these. You can also get the scaleless, the German scale, which is called Doitsu. So you can have a Doitsu kohaku, you can have a Doitsu sankei, you can have a Doitsu showa. So these are, for when you start talking about fancy koi, these are very important, and you get all of these different color varieties. And then there's some other ones that are maybe just as important, but not the most common ones. And one of them is the Asagi, and the Asagi was one of the very first color varieties developed, and it actually is blue on the top. And when you look at this from the top, these are blue, and they're just beautiful. This is actually one of my favorite fish, the Asagi. It has this blue on the top, and it can have some amount of red on the bottom. And this one you see is fully red on the bottom and blue on the top, so that's a really beautiful color. Uh, the Kumon Ryu, it looks like, oh, isn't that kind of a Showa because it's it's white with a lot of black on it. So it's a little different from the Showa, and it is a scaleless fish. And Kumon Ryu means dragonfish. And to me, I think it's more of a um, killer whale fish. It looks, black and white like a killer whale, but it's called the dragonfish, so Kumon Ryu. And it is a scaleless white fish with lots of black on it. And then there's these other color varieties, Ginmitsubu, Shisui. Shisui is the same as Asagi, but it's a scaleless. So the scales, it only has a row of these blue scales on the top, but there's no scales or only a few scales on the side. So essentially the Asagi is the blue fish with red. The Shisui, which is also very popular, is a scaleless color variety based on the Asagi. And then, there's all different solid color, solid white, Shiramuji, which means white only, Orangi, Ogon, which is a metallic orange koi, Goshiki, which is blue, black, red, and white, and a sort of a gray color. So the Goshiki means 5 colors. And then the Doitsu, again, we talked about Doitsu meaning scaleless or fewer than normal scales. And the Karasu is the Japanese word for crow. And so this is an all black fish. And so you can have a Karasugoi, which is all black, or a Doitsu Karasugoi, which is all black. It has fewer scales. And these are considered very good luck to have a all black koi in your pond. A lot of times I consider it's good luck if you can find it because it's all black and it's in your pond. It's very hard to find. So maybe that's where the good luck comes from, is a good luck finding this black koi. So those, there's a lot more color combinations in these, but these are just some of the most popular ones. And so I just wanted to point out that koi coloration is very specific, has specific naming, and if you're really into koi, you'll learn all of these things. You'll know these color varieties, and these are really among the most beautiful of fish. And especially remember, these live 50, 60 or more years, and they get 2 to 3 feet long or bigger. So these are really good pets. These can be long-term pets. I have koi that are over 20 years old, so 23, 24-year-old koi. So they can live a long time. Okay, so where do these koi come from? Well, Japan, right? Originally, they came from Japan, but now we find them farmed in Japan and other parts of Asia. Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia have some really nice koi. They breed koi in the U.S. Israel has a very good koi culture, and even South Africa. So there's a lot of different places that breed koi. So when you go to your koi store, you're very likely buying some koi that are farmed in the U.S., but a lot of those koi are farmed in Asia, and they're imported to the U.S. So we talked about this in some of our other talks, is how it'll go from a farmer to the exporter to an importer to a wholesaler. So these koi have traveled quite a bit before they end up at your pet store or your pond store. So they've had a lot of different people that have handled them, and hopefully they're doing treatments to prevent disease and handling them carefully, which we'll talk about that. And eventually you find that one you like, and you buy it and you bring it home and you put it into a large aquarium or a pond, an indoor pond or an outdoor backyard pond. And you want to have literally thousands of gallons if you're having a few koi. And one of the problems is people buy koi when they're little. Most commonly, you'll see them like 4 to 6 to 10 inches at a koi store, and you think, oh, I'll buy 10 of them. Well, now you get them home, and a couple of years later, they're 2 feet, 3 feet long, and what you thought was not overcrowded is they do become overcrowded because you have too many koi in your pond once they get bigger. So we're going to talk a little bit about Japan here. And in a trip I took to Japan, there is in Ojoya, Japan, in the Niigata Prefecture, a koi museum. and this is a must-see if you go to Japan. It's a museum all about the culture of koi, and they have indoor ponds, which beautiful, massive, beautiful koi that were donated by the koi farmers there. And then there's an outdoor pond, and this is just a picture. I love this picture. I was there in November, so it's kind of getting cold. You can see the colors in the tree. This is all on the Zen garden at the Koi Museum, and then there's this huge koi pond. You can see a platform for sitting there looking at the koi, and the koi there are marvelous, just the most beautiful koi in the world. Okay, so if you're in Japan, I went there to buy some koi, and you're at this koi farm, and what do you do? So this is Koda Yoroji, that means koi farm in Japan, and so they have these kind of greenhouse structures. These ponds are raised above the ground, so they're built inside the greenhouse. You walk around the edge of the pond, and you're looking down inside at these just massively enormous and beautiful koi. And this is at the Koda farm. We pulled out these koi here, and so these are, there's a Sankei and a Showa and Yamabuki Ogan, which is these metallic white and yellow, which are just massively beautiful fish. Just wonderful. And so you find these fish, and they're, you can't resist buying them. You can't resist buying more than you really should. So this is what it's like at a Japanese farm. So here, this one again, we're inside of a greenhouse, looking down at a pond. These ponds are about 6 feet deep, so they're pretty deep. And look at the massive size of these koi in here. These are we talked about ogons. So ogons is a solid color metallic. So gold ogons, yellow ogons, silver ogons, just beautiful fish. And so in order to keep these large numbers of really big fish in these indoor ponds, they have just constant water flow. So they're using, spring water, and the water's just coming in there. So they have this, really high quality water. And this was November, so the water temperature was 59 degrees. In the summer, it's warmer, but by keeping them indoors, these fish will grow throughout the year. Now, I mentioned from the book that in the one season from spring to fall, these fish would grow 4 inches. So that's not very big, 10 centimeters, 4 inches. But now, keeping them indoors and warm through the winter, they'll get them to 10 or 12 inches in a year. So they'll grow a lot bigger, faster. And so koi indoors, they're growing them faster. And of course, the bigger they are, the more valuable they become. So they get more money by keeping them indoors and getting them to grow faster. And then they will have filters that are baki showers, which are a series of tanks or containers with holes in the bottom and gravel inside of them. So the water goes through the gravel, drips out into a second container, through the gravel, drips out. And essentially, you're making a degasser that gets oxygen, gets rid of carbon dioxide, has the biofiltration inside the lava. And it works really, really well in keeping the water good. So these are real common in using the baki showers. And then because they're kept warm, they'll continue to grow and continue to eat year round. It gets cold in Japan, it freezes over like the north of the US, the koi go dormant, the pond would ice over, and the fish don't grow, they don't eat, they just sit dormant during the winter. So in the spring, they would become active again. So here, by keeping them warm year round, that they grow bigger and faster. And here's just a couple of koi that we saw there. These are close to 3 feet long. You can see they're really big. And I hope you can appreciate the color here. This one is golden, and this one is silver. So kin is gold, gin is silver, kin matsuba and gin matsuba koi. And these were just really beautiful koi. These were being purchased in Japan to be shipped to Oregon to go into a Japanese garden at a pond in Oregon. And so we saw the guy buying these in Japan to ship to the U.S. And so here's what a koi farm looks like. This is the Marudo Yujiro. And so this is in the background, you'll see on the right is the house. On the left are the greenhouses. In front of the greenhouses, you'll see the koi pond. And then next to the koi pond are the rice paddies. And so just like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, rice is a staple of Japan, and the koi were secondary to the rice in that they had these ponds that they use to irrigate the rice paddies. And they said, hey, let's throw some fish in these ponds and raise fish too. And so sure enough, here you are. They're still raising the rice, but now they're raising these koi, which are probably more valuable than the rice, in their koi pond, or the rice paddy ponds. So that's what a koi farm looks like in Japan. And then here, this was actually in America, but this is a farm here in America. So they have these larger ponds. And this is the truck in the back is a food truck. And the truck drives along the side of the pond and it shoots the food pellets out into the pond. And the fish will just come in this boiling mass of fish to eat the food when they're fed. And so they keep them food in breeding season. They take the big breeders into these troughs. They're shallow. They put inside the troughs these little mats, lay them on the side. The koi want to lay eggs on a substance. In the wild, the carp lay eggs on the grass along the side of the pond. In Japan, traditionally, they put pine boughs into the koi pond. The koi would lay their eggs on the pine branches, and then they take the pine branches out and put them in another tank or pond to raise the eggs. So there's something that a substance that the eggs will be laid on. It's kind of hard to see here, but there's tiny little white spots on the black mat. Each one of those white spots is an egg. So after they lay their eggs, the mats are removed into another pond. And so here you see them laying on the edge of the pond. And those eggs will hatch into fry, the baby fish, and then they'll feed on the nutrients that are in the pond. So algae and infusoria and things, microorganisms that are in the pond is what the baby fish will eat. Here's a picture of the fry hatching. This is on an indoor tank where you could take these mats out and put them inside. And you can see all these little fish hatch out of the eggs and swim around there. And they'll keep them in the pond to a certain size, and then they'll move them. In Japan, they'll start separating out the colors within the first few weeks when these fish are still small, and they'll sort them by color, and they only keep the best colors. So if they're not good quality color, they don't get raised. They end up being euthanized, or so they only keep the best koi. And that's why the Japanese koi are the best quality koi. In America, we tend to, raise everything, keep everything, quantity over quality. So you get a lot more fish, but some of them aren't as pretty. And so you'll see koi that don't fit any of those classic descriptions we already talked about. They're kind of mixed colors, and those are not liked in Japan, but they still pretty fish. They're still, great to put in your pond. So you'll see a lot of those in U.S. fish stores. You'll see koi that aren't show koi, and yes, they do have shows for koi. We'll talk about that in a minute. So grow out in dirt ponds. So here you can see they get bigger and bigger, and then again they get sorted by color. When they get to the right size, the pond will be drained down so it's very shallow, and then seines will be used to net them into an area, and then nets or buckets used to catch them and move them to wherever they need to go to the next stage if they're being sold. And so this is just a picture of some young koi. This is in Japan, and again, this is one of these 6 feet deep ponds indoors. The white along the right edge is the cement edge that you stand on. You look down in there, and I couldn't even venture a guess how many thousands of koi are in here. And these are all probably, I'm guessing, about 8 inches long, looking at this picture, if I remember right. So these are all yearling koi, that they're in their first year, this first year koi. And these all look like they're kohaku. So they separate them by color. So now you have thousands of kohaku to choose from and say, which one is the best one? Well, like any art form, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And with koi specifically are considered art, and what one person thinks is the most beautiful fish, someone else might not agree with. And so it's definitely considered your own taste preference for what you like the best. But we do know koi are very, very friendly. They'll eat out of your hand. I've seen people that feed them with baby bottles, and they'll come and suck on the nipple of a baby bottle and eat a liquid food out of that. They're very, very fun. They can be petted. I've seen people who can pick the koi up out of the pond and hold them. So they can be very, very friendly fish. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the koi handling. And this is really important in making sure when you do have your koi, because they're heavy, they're big, they're big fish, and when you're picking them up, you can hurt them. If they flip out of the net and drop down. So it's important to know how to handle your koi properly. So always handle and transport koi safely. Be sure it's netted carefully using a koi net of appropriate size and mesh or a one-way koi sock. So here is a koi net in the picture. You see it's very shallow. It's not a deep net. It's plastic. It's not a fishing net with knots. It won't damage their skin. And you just kind of scoop the fish up into here, and then you scoop the fish out of the net with a koi sock. And this long black part here, this is a koi sock. It has a round loop at one end, probably about 10 inches in diameter, and then a netting that's a tubular netting that's open at the other end. So you can scoop the fish up head first into the hoop end and then carry it inside the koi sock. And then when you want to let it go, you let go of the opposite end and it'll slide right out into the container. So it only goes one way so it doesn't damage the scales by going backwards. And so these are real important. If you have big koi, you need to invest in a koi sock. And you can get these at your koi dealers on the internet, etc. And so once you transfer it from the big tank through the koi net and the koi sock into a tub, that's where you would look at it or carry it. You'd carry it in a tub of water. Now, in really big fish, this can get really heavy, so it might take a couple people, or if it's only a short distance, you might be able to transport it still in the koi sock. And I've had to do that before because they can get pretty heavy. A big koi can weigh 20 pounds or more. Don't chase it around. Use two nets if necessary, one net to chase the fish into the other net. Place it in a plastic bowl to carry it. And and then when you're carrying it, put a net or a cloth over the bowl so it doesn't jump out, because we certainly don't want it to get hurt. And so when these koi are shipped from the farm or from a dealer to the pet store, they're transported in plastic bags. Koi are big. They do have big spines on their fins, so you need to double bag them usually so that they don't poke their spines through the bag. And then you should fill it with just enough water to cover the fish. So usually about a third of water, 2/3 of oxygen. If it's only a short trip for, like, let's say an hour going home, you don't really need oxygen. Air is fine. But if you're talking about transportation for multiple hours overnight on an airplane, for example, shipping from Japan to America, then they should be packed with pure oxygen. So you pack it with oxygen, and then these are koi from a koi show, and they're being bagged, ready to go back home. And so the fish are bagged, and they're floated in the pond so they don't get hot. If you took that bag and just laid it on the cement or on the ground, those fish are going to get hot. So you want to keep them inside the pond so the temperature stays even until they're ready to travel. And then you can add salt. This is commonly done in freshwater fish. You can add about a teaspoon of salt per gallon of water, gives it about a 0.1% salinity, which is good to reduce stress on any kind of freshwater fish. So the bags are then put into cardboard boxes. There's often insulation like styrofoam inside there to keep the temperature constant. And then you can transport them in that styrofoam-filled cardboard box. And this is the way koi are shipped across from U.S. to Japan, or probably even from a koi dealer to a retailer in a truck in the U.S. would be in boxes like this. And in the hot weather, you can put some ice packs in there. In cooler weather, you could put some heat packs. All the koi are very temperature tolerant. They don't mind it all the way down into the 40 degrees is okay for koi, as long as the temperature change is gradual. When you get them at home now, you want to unpack them. And we talked about this in one of the other lectures, is ideally any new fish should go into a quarantine system. So either a tank, a pond, somewhere where it's not with all your other fish. Quarantine them for several weeks, make sure they're healthy before you put them with 3 other fish. But when you get them home, float the bag in the water to get them back to the same temperature. 15 minutes, unless the temperature is quite extreme, you might go a little bit longer, but 15, 20 minutes should be fine. Don't open that bag until you're ready to take the fish out, because the carbon dioxide that's trapped in the bag keeps the pH of the water low, and the lower pH of the water keeps any ammonia that was produced by the fish as non-toxic ammonium, NH4+. But once that carbon dioxide goes away, the pH goes up, it'll convert the ammonium to ammonia, NH3, which is toxic. So don't open the bag until you're ready to take the fish out. Once you open the bag, net the fish out, put it into your quarantine tank, throw the bag water away. You don't want to be dumping that into your tank. And just a special talk about koi shows, because koi shows are very common. Just like dog shows, people bring their koi all around the country or all around the world to show them in koi shows. And the old Japanese style was where you would take, I'll give you an example. Let's say you take 10-inch kohaku fish, and everybody had a 10-inch kohaku fish would go into one tank. And then the judges would go around and look at that tank of fish and judge each of those 10-inch kohaku and pick out the best one. And you'd get, first, second, and third prizes, and everybody was happy. Well, that was until 1999, when after a koi show in New York, all the fish that went home started dying. And Dr. Myron Kibis and a few other veterinarians investigated this, and they found there was a newly described virus called koi herpesvirus that was infecting these fish and killing them. And so it transferred from one fish to the other. So somebody's fish had it, they brought it to the show, it spread it to the other fish, they went home, they put the fish in their pond, they all died, everybody was very unhappy. So now at koi shows, it's called the English style, where you bring your fish, they go into one tank, all of your fish, or you might have more than one tank, but your fish are all together, and nobody's fish get mixed together. And not only that, but they usually will space these out so water doesn't splash from tank to tank. They have separate nets for every tank so that you're not mixing a, a net in one tank, then placed into another tank. You don't want to spread that. And that's much, much better, a lot safer. And here, I just want to point out, though, there's a beautiful koi here, and here's these cute little kids. These are actually my daughters when they were little, and they stick their hand in the water. And then they go to the next one, and they stick their hand in the water again. So you have to really be careful. And that's why even coming home with your own koi from a koi show, you should probably quarantine them. Make sure they're healthy. Okay, but koi shows are a lot of fun. They're all over the country. I recommend you go to Koi USA. There's some websites where you can go on and find koi shows in your area, and you'll go see these, beautiful fish on display and being judged. So here is the All Japan Koi Show. This is from 2012. I was there. And so here you see these, massive koi. So this is one person's koi. All these fish, there's different color varieties. So there's a kohaku here. There's shisui, shoas, and here's an all white one. So a platinum ogon, sankes, and you see what they do to judge them now. Because how do I judge this fish against another fish of the same variety owned by somebody else that's in a different pond? So the way they do it now is they look at all of the fish in real life, but they also have these photos of each individual fish. And so when they're comparing, they'll now take the photos of all the same color fish and the same size fish, because they're judged by size as well as color. And so you don't have a baby fish judged against a big fish, even though they're the same color. They're judged by size groupings and then colors. And so now you have a set of photos of every fish of that size and color. And then you can look through all the photos, you rank them, figure out which one's the best. Then you can go back to those tanks, because the tanks are numbered on the photos, and look at the individual fish and say, yep, this fish is the best. And so you'll notice these little black ribbons. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 of these fish have actually been awarded a ribbon. I don't know which place it is, but they've been awarded ribbons. So this is actually a very happy koi owner, probably a koi dealer, who's showing his koi here that has won 5 ribbons on his fish. And the grand champion So here this is this giant 80 boo is a size category. This is probably close to 3 feet long, and it's a female because you can tell by the big belly here. And the females have much bigger abdomens, bigger bellies. The males are more tapered, streamlined, torpedo-like. Females, big bellies. And usually it's the females that win the shows because they like these big-bodied fish, and the females just have big bodies. So here's the grand champion of the show is this big kohaku. It's a white and red koi, red pattern on the back. They judge it by the uh, brightness of the colors, the clarity, the intenseness. The white is pure white, the red is carmine red, the shape of the pattern across the back, how evenly placed it is, the edges of the color pattern called kiwa, which should be very, very sharp and distinct, and then the body conformation, the fin shape and carriage. So it's just like judging a diamond, the 5 C's in judging a diamond. There's these 5 categories that they judge the fish on. And, look at the trophy. This is the winner's trophy. This is a pretty fancy deal, right? Well, guess what? This fish just went up to probably $100,000 in value based on winning this show. And the person who owns this fish and breeds this fish, those baby fish are babies from this grand champion. So they become more valuable. And there have been fish that are winners at Koi Show that have sold for over $1 million for one fish, $1 million. So this is really a big deal when you win these All Japan Koi Show and you're the grand champion, and obviously a female, they'll produce up to several 100,000 eggs a year. So you get lots of babies, and then you just, keeping the good babies, these are worth very, very valuable fish. So this is a big business. Okay, so we talked about you're coming home from the koi show now because springtime is very popular for koi shows. You want to quarantine. And this is, one of my clients has this beautiful quarantine system. He has 3 separate tanks here. Each one has its own filter system. Each one has a heater on it. And they have a net over the top of them. So when he brings koi home, he can put them in these tanks, keep them here for a couple weeks, medicate them, check them, make sure they're healthy before he puts them back in the pond. You don't have to have something quite as fancy as this, but this is really, really nice. There's also some retail fish systems that are sold for koi dealers to sell, and these can make really nice quarantine tanks as well. They're about 4 feet long, 3 feet deep, and 3 feet wide, and so they hold several hundred gallons of water. They have a skimmer, a water pump to circulate, air pump with air stones, filter mats to add biofilter and mechanical filtration, the bioballs for the bacteria for biofilter, a UV light to help disinfect the water, keep the fish healthy, a heater, control temperature, a bottom drain for draining, and you know how many gallons of water it is, so you can easily medicate it. So something like this is really ideal. So this is just an example of something that's available commercially for doing a quarantine system. Works really well. So that's the good part of the koi, the beautiful fish, the breeding, the koi shows. Now we're going to spend just a little bit of time talking about diseases. And of course, nobody likes that. We've talked in other lectures a lot about diseases, so some of this will be repetitive if you've seen my other lectures. But here we're going to just go over, what keeps the koi healthy. I like to put this one in. This is my friend, Dr. Greg Lubart from North Carolina State University did this. And this is, I think is so impressive. This is, you've heard of CAT scans, CT scans. That stands for computer assisted tomography, or now just called computed tomography. And it's an X-ray, but it's a series of X-rays generated with a computer that then builds a 3-dimensional model from the photos, from the X-rays. And so this is a 3-dimensional model of a koi. This is not a real, like a skeleton. This is a picture through a living fish and recreated this image of a koi skeletal system. So I thought that's pretty fascinating, what CAT scans can do. Okay, so infectious diseases. So we talked about viruses. We already talked about koi herpesvirus, carp pox. Then there's bacterial infections and fungal infections. And so here is a koi with carp pox, and carp pox causes these little white spots on it. We'll talk about that on another slide. And this is a fish with branchiomyces, which is a gill fungus. And so it's got this white fungus growing on the gills. And those are the most common of the infectious diseases. And my last talk was about infectious diseases. And I didn't, excuse me, I didn't specifically go into some of these koi diseases because I knew I was going to do a koi lecture. So Carp Pox virus, it's actually a herpes virus. It's not a pox virus. It's called Carp Pox because it looks like chicken pox on people, causes these little white lesions on the fish. They're raised pink, kind of waxy feeling lesions. They don't wipe off. They're solid epithelium. They can come and go. We think it might be temperature dependent because they'll go away and then they come back like spring and fall. They're mildly contagious, meaning if you have a fish in the pond that has it, you may see it in other fish in the pond. However, I have clients that have koi that have this, and many of their fish in the pond don't have it. So, they've been together for years and never got it. So it's not 100% contagious. Maybe it has to do with an injury on the fish's skin originally that became infected, or some kind of a weakened immune system that the fish get it. So if you do see these, you can use a scalpel and remove them. So kind of scrape these off and then treat it with a disinfectant. The skin will heal over, and the treatment will cause them to get rid of the spots faster than if you did nothing. However, they will come back. So the treatment is not curative, it's just cosmetic. Koi herpes virus is another type of herpes virus, cyprinid herpes virus type 3. And this one causes erosion of the epithelium. So here is a gill tissue of this koi, and the yellow lines are actually cartilage that used to be gill, and all of the red part, which is the epithelium, the tissue on the gill, has sloughed off. So you see the pink part is the only part of the gill that's still not even normal, but has gill tissue on it. The rest of this, all of the gill tissue is just fallen off the cartilage. So this fish has died from suffocation. Its gills just eroded. And this is one of the common signs. They get this white mucus on the skin, they get the erosion of the gills, and they'll die pretty rapidly. So the mortality occurs rapidly once you start seeing signs. It's highly contagious. You could lose the whole pond. And I've had clients lose all of their fish from adding a new fish to the pond. Gets there. It's active from 60 to 80 degrees. And why is that important? So let's say you bought a new fish in the wintertime and the water was 50 degrees, 55 degrees. The fish will not show signs of herpes virus. It could carry the herpes virus, but not show symptoms. So you add that fish into your pond, and then in the spring or summer, the water temperature gets higher. Now that activates the virus. The fish gets sick. Well, then it'll spread it to every fish in your pond. And now you got a whole pond full of sick fish or possibly dead fish. So what can you do? So one of the things during a quarantine of a new fish is you want to raise that quarantine temperature up into the upper 70s, maybe even 80, even as high as 86 degrees, because if you're heating the water up to that temperature, the virus will become active, and usually you'll see the fish starting to show signs of disease fairly, very quickly. So we wouldn't want to do a quarantine at a cooler temperature because you could miss this. Now, the treatment, there is no specific treatment, except here it says TX, that stands for treatment, 86 degrees Fahrenheit. What does that mean? Well, it's been shown that if you end up with fish with koi herpes virus and you heat the water to 86 degrees, that higher temperature inactivates the virus. And it acts almost like immunization, that the fish has been exposed to the virus, it inactivates the virus so the fish doesn't die, so you can save your fish. Now, the fish can still carry herpes virus, and it's believed that it might still be infectious to other fish, but it itself will now become immune and it will not get the disease. So what some people have done is they've just heated all the fish up to 86 degrees. The ones that are healthy and live and they haven't died from herpes virus, they're now considered immune. And then they'll sell them. And then you may not know that, and it's still not known for sure if they could carry the virus to spread to other fish. but it will save your fish if you do have fish that get koi herpes virus, if you can get them up to this temperature. You need very strong aeration at that high temperature to keep the oxygen level up, keep the water quality good, because if there's any ammonia becomes more toxic at higher temperatures. So you need to, keep the water clean, keep it well aerated, and that will help keep your fish alive. And there are vaccines available for this. So it is something that some people considered, trying to get the vaccine for that. And that's, just another thought. I'll leave that for there. But very devastating when you get this disease. So bacteria are probably another common thing. So the bacterial septicemia means bacteria circulating in the blood. It'll get into the liver and kidney and cause necrosis. It can cause skin lesions, can cause gill damage. And this is commonly caused by motile gram-negative rod bacteria called Aeromonas, Pseudomonas, Enterobacter, Flavobacter are commonly found. There's also a non-motile gram-negative short rod bacteria that's specific in koi and also salmonid fish is the Aeromonas salmonicida acromogenes. And this is one that has become not originally found in koi, found in salmon, but now we see it in koi. And then, of course, gram-positive Coccobacilli mycobacterium. I went into a lot of detail about these on my infectious disease lecture, so I'm not really going to go into more detail here. Here's what the lesions look like in koi. They get this raised skin lesion that's reddened. Usually you won't see this because it happens so fast. This furuncle, the skin sloughs off. Now you get this red open sore. Those can eat through the muscle layer, and then it can get all the way into the abdomen. So you get this skin erythema, which is the redness, the furuncles, which is the raised area, ulcerations, which means the skin has been eaten away, and then necrosis of just damaged tissue, which ultimately will lead to death of the fish. And one specific one, Flavobacterium columnaris disease, it used to be called Flexibacter. This is this white fuzzy bacteria, which you can see on the microscope. So this is a microscope slide of a skin mucus sample. And here it is. This happens to be actually a goldfish, not a koi. But you can see it on this goldfish, raises this white fuzzy patches. And this is common in tropical fish. We see it in koi and goldfish, and it causes white cottony growths that kind of look like a fungus. And under the microscope, it makes this haystack appearance. And then you want to treat this with topical antibiotics and disinfectant, plus antibiotic medications in the food or antibiotic injections. Branchiomyces is fairly uncommon. I've only seen it one time, and this is a koi. It's got this white fungus growing on its gill. You can tell this is a fungus. You look at it under the microscope, but also it will scrape off. Unlike koi herpes virus, which is the whole epithelium is falling off, this is a fuzzy growth on the surface of the gills, and it can be scraped off the gills, and it'll damage the gill lamella, cause gill damage, and of course then they can't breathe, and so they'll die. And now one of the things that we keep reinforcing when we talked about protozoa and when we talked about bacteria in the past is protozoa are not commonly seen. You don't know they have it, and they're probably the most common reason your fish get bacteria and fungal infections, because you've got protozoa that are damaging the skin. And so these protozoa, they get on the fish, and we're not going to spend a lot of details on them because we have a whole separate lecture on protozoa parasites. But Ichthyoboto is really tiny, very, very small. The smallest of the protozoa that you'll see, they can get on the gills, cause gill damage. They get on the skin. Epistolis here, Trichodina, Philodenella, Ichthyopterius, the ick parasite. So these are all protozoa. The way you would see them is the fish will get maybe some whitish mucus on the skin. Other than Ichthyopterius, the ick parasite, you'll see white spots on those. The rest of these don't cause any specific lesions on the fish other than just maybe some whitish or grayish tint to the surface of the skin. And so you don't really know them unless you do a microscopic exam of the mucus, and you'll find these protozoa on it. But the bacteria and fungus, they occur because these protozoa damage the skin. So it's really important to treat for these during the quarantine or if your fish starts showing bacterial or fungal infections. And then trematodes, these are the flatworms. So there's two common ones we see both in tropical fish and koi, Dactylogyrus, which is the gill fluke, and Gyrodactylus, which is the skin fluke. They look about the same. They got these big, nasty hooks that attach to the surface of the gills or the skin, cause damage, which then again gets bacterial infections on it. The difference is the gill fluke lays an egg. So here's one that has just laid this egg, and the skin fluke is a live bearer. So you see these hooks right here that are on the bottom right picture. It has two little hooks in the middle of its belly. Those hooks aren't on the fish. Those are inside the fish, and those are the hooks from the baby that you're seeing inside the mother. And the mother fluke will lay or give the mother fluke will give birth to a baby that is full grown, the same size as the mother. And not only that, sometimes the baby that's born already has hooks inside of it showing that it's pregnant with the next generation. So these can multiply very rapidly on your fish. And we talk about this disease and treatment in the metazoan parasite lecture. And then the last of these parasites are the crustacean parasites. Crustaceans, we think of crabs and lobsters. Well, look at this thing. It looks like a crab. The Argulis, the fish louse. Here it is on the surface of a koi gill. So this is pretty big, about a centimeter in diameter. You can see these with your eyes. So these are big enough that you can see. The anchor worm has this big anchor end that's embedded inside the skin of the fish. So just this worm-like appendage sticks out of the fish. That's why it has the name anchor worm. It looks like a worm, but when you pull it out, it has this anchor attaching it to the fish. And these are pretty common in koi. They can cause a lot of damage to the skin of the koi, get bacterial infections, but you can see these with your eyes. So this is something that if you see those, you can treat them. Okay, that's all the bad stuff with the koi. And I think I just would like to put a little plug in here, my advanced koi care book. If anyone's interested, this is available through Amazon, and probably we should get it on Live Aquaria too.
Yeah.
But it's a great book that talks about koi diseases, koi treatment, the history of koi, and answers all your koi questions.
Yeah.
So I would like to add one more thing on the koi, and this is again, it's from my book. It's I mentioned before about the koi becoming very popular after they were at this, this farmer show in Japan in 1914, and once the public became aware of koi. Nobody even knew about koi. They were just these farmers in Niigata Prefecture in Japan were the only people that knew about koi until they brought them to this Tokyo Agricultural Exhibition in 1914. After that, the word got out. The emperor kept them. Everybody wanted them. And so soon all of Japan wanted to keep koi, and the rest of the world followed. Koi were first exported to San Francisco in 1938. So that's even before World War II. And then, of course, World War II happened. Nothing koi related happened after that. Fortunately, the koi survived. But then in 1938, they were brought to San Francisco. They were brought to Hawaii in 1947, to Canada in 1949, to Brazil in 1953, England in 1966, and to South Africa in 1971. And then Herbert R. Axelrod, owner of Tropical Fish Hobbyist magazine at the time and Gulf Fish Farms in Palmetto, Florida, imported breeding stock koi in January 1969 from the Yoshida family koi farm in Japan, the winners of the Grand Champion Trophy at the first All Japan Nishikigoi koi show in 1968. And from these koi were bred millions of koi that were sold throughout the United States since the 70s, that were just kind of the start of the koi in America. And of course, now in America, you can buy koi that have been imported from Israel, koi that are imported from Japan, koi that are bred elsewhere in the United States. So koi are a very, very popular fish, very popular hobby, and just one of the most beautiful fish. Definitely one of my favorite fish. I even got them on my shirt today.
Awesome. Well, agreed. I mean, I know I learned a lot from this. I really appreciate the history lesson too of kind of how they came into popularity and how they became so prolific around the world. It's really interesting to see how that all came about. So thank you, Dr. Nick, for bringing this
You're
information
welcome.
forward and providing your time and knowledge. Even the photos of you at the farm while you're purchasing experience, it's actually something I've always kind of wondered about too, is sort of like what that must be like. So
It's amazing.
yeah, very cool. Well, hopefully one day I get to go to Japan and see that awesome museum there in Japan because that looked wonderful too.
It is.
So, all right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Nick, and thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Tank Talk. We'll be back again in 2 weeks.
Thank you, everyone.